Thank you everyone for joining us today for our third and final installment of the Culture for Change series. This time we're talking to leaders across the country, Detroit, DC, and St. Louis to hear about how they're engaging with and in communities from coast to coast. Make sure to save the date for the inaugural Culture for Change conference, which will take place next month, July 13th to July 16th. This 4-day virtual conference will allow participants to learn alongside experts and explore skills and strategies related to personal leadership development, management and leading, as well as organizational culture. Before we get into the panel, let's go over a few technical details. First, pets and kids are more than welcome to listen in. The chat can be used to drop in reactions, post thoughts on topics, and respond and share with other participants. Additionally, you can ask questions throughout the chat and panelists will hop in and out and answer them for you. However, if you have questions that you would like to specifically pose during a Q&A session, be sure to put them in the Q&A box. Last, make sure that we can all hear you. So make sure that your chat is set to all panelists and attendees. If you hit the wrong selection, it'll go to just one set of people. I'm excited to introduce our moderator for this evening. Chanel Hampton began her career as a middle school teacher, where her passion for larger systematic change in the education system grew. Particularly moved by the need for diverse teacher talent in organizations with the right motivations and mindsets working in communities, Chanel began her work in school and district level administration and later joined Teach for America's national recruitment team. Founding and leading national diversity initiatives, Chanel served as a national recruitment team leader and also worked with the organization's 52 regions as a strategic advisor and partner, resulting in unprecedented community engagement, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts and progress across the country. Chanel Hampton currently serves as the founder and president of Strategic Community Partners, a Detroit-based firm focused on working with local and national organizations rooted in education, equity, and justice. Chanel launched SCP with a vision of partnering with mission-driven organizations to build capacity and positively serve Black and marginalized communities. Thank you, Chanel.
Thanks, Alyssa. I have been looking forward to this conversation for several reasons. Over the past several months, we have been all experiencing COVID-19, and there's been an outpouring of conversation and resources, rightfully so, focused around how we can support community. But during these conversations, I've been thinking to myself, how do we think beyond COVID? And while it is horrific what is happening, the lives that have been lost, the health epidemic, I also know that we must plan ahead and be prepared and stronger than ever. So I'm looking forward to this conversation to help us get stronger and more prepared across the country. I've also been looking forward to this conversation because of the powerful folks we have joining us today. I've had the opportunity to work alongside several of our panelists and have a deep regard for the work that each of them do. So you all are certainly in for a great conversation. And before I pass it over to our panelists to introduce themselves a bit more in their background, I want to name one more pandemic. While COVID is a health pandemic, racism has been a multi-generational pandemic for over 400 years in this country. Just days ago, Rayshard Brooks was murdered at a Wendy's in Atlanta. Rhea Milton in Ohio and Dominique Fells in Pennsylvania. This is not new. I think back and have found myself daily reflecting on living in St. Louis. And 1 week after I moved back home to Detroit, found myself getting on a plane and driving or flying right back to be in protest alongside brothers and sisters and former students and their parents as we protested the murder of Michael Brown. This isn't new. For over 400 years, we have been experiencing this, but there seems to be a shift in how people are receiving what is happening and has been happening. So I just want to name that as an organization, SCP was founded because of this very real and long-standing racial inequity that exists in our country and globally. We exist to ensure that Black and marginalized leaders and people are at the table, leading the charges, bringing the solutions, And our number one goal is to ensure that Black folks are at the table. They have the power, the resources, the opportunity, the access that is their God-given right and potential. And so I want to name this pandemic because we have several pandemics staring us in our face. And one of them certainly has been around far longer than COVID. So I won't speak for our panelists, but I do want to say that as we were preparing for this conversation, initially, we're thinking about COVID and how do we engage and serve community beyond COVID. But you might hear today some of their reflections and advice and lessons learned at the intersection of racial inequity, a pandemic that has existed far longer than COVID. With that, I am humbled to be here alongside such powerful folks who have been doing racial equity work and also been on the front lines supporting communities across the country as we all experience COVID. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to each of our panelists to share a bit about their backgrounds and the work that they're doing and where they're reporting out from. So I will pass it over to you, Charli, to introduce yourself. And again, thank you all for joining us.
Hey everyone, thank you for being here today, and thank you to the amazing team at Strategic Community Partners for having me. So yeah, I'm a St. Louis native, born and raised, and still live in St. Louis, and super proud to call the Black I was born on, the Black that I still live on, my home. I have been here since our return from college, so came back here to join Teach for America, and it was a huge culture shock to come back to St. Louis from rural Texas back to urban St. Louis, but definitely was a catalyst for the work that I do today. So taught in the same school as Chanel, and from there, that journey really sparked me to think about what is my role to really spark shifting a system that was nurturing, supporting students of color to not just survive but thrive. So started an educational access organization and leadership development organization, and then transitioned to then lead an organization birthed out of the Ferguson Uprising to advance policy change and racial equity. And now I have the pleasure of serving as the founder of a new organization called WEPOWER. And our mission is to activate the power of Black and Latinx communities, brilliant folks with bold dreams who deserve the right to dream big and actually have a chance at realizing those dreams through building power and using that power to drive systems change. So it's an honor to be here. And I know that the circumstances that we confront really are challenging me, and I imagine all of us to think more deeply about the role that we play to really dismantle racism. So thanks for having this convo today.
Thanks, Charli. Kayla, I will pass it over to you.
Thanks, Chanel. Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla Roney Smith. I'm here outside of Detroit, but in Southeast Michigan. And I am originally from Northern Michigan, so a rural community several hours north of here. I've been in Metro Detroit for about 8 years. Initially moved here after graduating from Michigan State University to join the College Advising Corps, which places recent college grads in communities where generally not a large percentage of students are likely to enroll in college. I stayed in that community for about 7 years, running a college access focused nonprofit once I transitioned out of my student facing role. And I absolutely loved that work. Working one-on-one with students, parents, educators, families, but I just became frustrated as I saw daily the systemic barriers that were really preventing my students and their families from being able to move forward. And so began exploring ways of how I could feel like I was being more impactful on a larger scale and in a more systems level way. And so became interested in philanthropy because I felt that philanthropy was really uniquely positioned to be able to catalyze change because of its role, various roles that it can play simultaneously. So in addition to funder, I felt like philanthropy could serve as convener, as advocate, researcher, et cetera. And so joined Ballmer Group about a year ago. It's a national philanthropy formed several years ago by Steve and Connie Ballmer. We have, in addition to some national grant making, do deep dive regional grant making in 3 communities. So Washington State, Los Angeles County, and Southeast Michigan. I'm in our Michigan office focused on talent work. So K-12, higher ed, and workforce development, which is part of our broader focus of economic mobility for low-income children and families. And I would just echo Charli in saying that thinking a lot about everything that is happening right now, and how I feel like I'm spending a lot of time trying to figure out what role I can play, my family can play, our organization can play, in really dismantling the structures as they exist right now and as they were founded to exist and perpetuate the racial inequities that we still see way too many years later.
Thanks for joining us, Kayla. Burnell, I'll pass it over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Burnell, Holland here. I am Deputy Director of the My Brother's Keeper Alliance, which is an initiative of the Obama Foundation. And I take great pride and pleasure in having the opportunity to work in an organization associated with the 44th President of the United States. My location right now is Southeast Washington, D.C. I was born in D.C., raised just outside in Prince George's County, Maryland, and based here in the district directly while working for the foundation. My work does take me throughout the country now, as my sort of day-to-day portfolio is really mostly focused on a national grant competition that we launched in 2018, specifically focused on the areas of youth violence prevention and more effective mentoring practices. So we have since selected a cohort of 19 organizations throughout the continental United States and Puerto Rico, and Detroit included in that cohort as well. I've also, prior to coming to the Obama Foundation, spent a lot of time in community engagement work. I was working for DC Public Schools before jumping over to the My Brother's Keeper space, and really in the Family and Public Engagement Division of the district. And then when, so it looks like some folks can't hear me too well, so let me try to speak up a little bit more. And I'll put in some headphones if it helps too. But that was all a part of my career trajectory prior to going to the foundation. So I'm excited for this conversation. Engaging with community has been a big part of my experience and work. And special thank you to Strategic Community Partners team. Just thrilled to be here. So thanks, Janelle.
Thanks for joining us, Burnell. Kalisha.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kalisha Davis, and I'm the CS Equity Curriculum Project Director at the Kapor Center. Kapor is a national organization based in Oakland, California, dedicated to removing barriers in STEM education and tech careers for underrepresented people of color. We do this by offering comprehensive approaches that span from seeking inclusive practices for professionals of color working in startup and tech companies, to social impact investing, to advocating for opportunities for children and youth to be exposed to the field through school-based programs and initiatives. I was brought on specifically to develop and convene the Equitable Computer Science Curriculum Initiative. That is a multi-year endeavor promoting the creation of more culturally responsive, asset-based practices in computer science education with and for children of color in grades K through 12. I'm new to the organization, having joined in April of this year after 5 years as the Director of Community Outreach at the Detroit Historical Society. There I was granted the privilege of co-creating what is now known as the Detroit 67 Project, a multi-year endeavor commemorating the uprising of 1967 here in Detroit. I'm still based in the Detroit area. And I'd say the biggest pivot that I've had is acclimating myself to the field, building relationships to support the work, and thinking carefully about existing relationships and the knowledge that can broaden our horizons to lead us toward more meaningful outcomes. So it's such a pleasure to be here with you all today. And thank you, Chanel, again for this invitation. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited to dig into the conversation, and also just want to remind folks that we are recording this conversation. We're also on Facebook Live, so we have folks tuning in from a couple places. And if you have questions, particularly for our attendees, for panelists, feel free to also chat those in. You might see panelists chatting back with you. In addition, we'll make sure to reserve some time for some Q&A before we dig into an additional session where you all will have opportunity to hear about organizations and sign up to directly start digging in and serving community more at the end of this conversation. So before we really dig in around COVID and how you all are thinking about engaging in community beyond COVID, I'm curious, just starting like peeling back another layer, what does community mean to each of you? And I want to just kind of throw that out there to each of you to get us started.
I can jump in if that's all right. And hopefully, just nod as if you can hear me. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you much better.
All right, cool. So to me, I mean, community is it's not just a physical space or geographic area. I mean, community is where you feel the most connected to your innermost self, where you feel rested, where you feel the most safe. And I think it's organic, and a lot of those things are interconnected. So it's not necessarily about having the same characteristics with the people that you're around, but more so shared values. And I would say to be in community with someone, I think requires a sense of shared values and or communal responsibility. So that could be as basic as don't blast your music loud in your neighborhood in the wee hours of the night out of respect for your neighbors, and knowing that's an unspoken and yet widely understood acceptance of a value, to something far more complex. That's what we're seeing right now with widespread demonstrations. And that very active, human act of recognizing the pain and trauma of your countrymen and being in community with them and taking a stand against racial inequality and police violence against Black people in this country. That's an act of community as well. So to me, it's an incredibly important thing, and the investment in and acknowledgement of it is essential for us reaching our full potential as a country and as a society.
I'll jump in. So I agree with everything Burnell shared. And for WEPOWER, we do have a pretty targeted focus on place-based communities. So we're looking at geographies where there is a higher concentration of Black and or Latinx folks, particularly Black folks in a highly segregated place like St. Louis. Communities where there's a high concentration of Black folks and Black folks who are unfortunately living in poverty and where there's extreme disinvestment. And within that place-based framework, we're always trying to figure out who are the folks who are ready for change, who are ready to lead that change, and who want to be in real and deep relationship with other folks in their community who are equally committed to that. And I think that part of our analysis of how we think about community is really around, is there a shared commitment to co-create a future where each person who is part of this community maintains their dignity, maintains a sense of value among each other, and where they're able to honestly not just survive but thrive. So it's both about shared sort of demographic circumstances, but also shared values, as Burnell said. And equally as important for us to think about community as a group of folks in a space where there's a shared commitment to co-creating a different future than the reality that we're confronting today.
I would echo both Burnell and Charli and add that to me, community is really about connectivity and fellowship. So how connected and engaged you feel, whether it's with others in your physical space, or maybe it's an online community, an organization you're involved in. And I think the way we think about community as an organization, at least specifically in our place-based work, so in our regions, we do some national grant making, as I mentioned, but the reason that the place-based work is so important to us is because we really believe that being part of a community is important as you're thinking about driving change in that community. And so we talk all the time about how, like, we have an invested interest in making sure that the changes that we aim to create with partners, with grantees, with others who we're working with, because we all live here and we all plan to stay here, and so we really feel connected and a part of that co-creation process, to Charli's point. And so I think the connectivity in whatever sense, whether it be physical, digital, some sort of common interest, I think is extremely important, and how you can use that connectivity to empower others within your community to drive toward that change.
Those are all wonderful definitions of community. I came across a quote recently from Bishop Desmond Tutu where he said, "You are and become more human through your relationships." And that resonated with me immediately because that's how I see community. It's centered in relationships, those that we're born into, those that we actively seek and create for ourselves, and those that find us when we're most in need. Community is defined, in my opinion, through the quality of our interactions with people in our daily lives and existence. We all play a role in uplifting community and loving on it and receiving love and compassion from others, and holding the members of our community accountable when we face challenges. Like this work, it has to be centered on people. And I think that starts with establishing trust and relationships.
Thank you. I found myself taking notes already as you all are talking. So as we think about, you all shared both communities you are a part of and communities that you're serving, so much has happened and happened overnight really with COVID. So I want to start digging in and would, again, share this out to each of you. How has COVID impacted the communities that you are a part of and the communities that you serve?
Well, I think something that has been more true than ever is that the pandemic has revealed on local and national levels, even global levels, that things that seemed impossible and that government asserted was like, oh, that's just too radical to do, or that's too costly to do, are actually things that are doable. They're getting done, and they have the potential to be like fundamental things that can sustain. So for example, there's this emerging but also really historic conversation around, for example, universal basic income, something that was completely off the table, more off the table before the pandemic, actually became a real thing that happened for tons and tons of Americans amidst the pandemic. It both happened for businesses, but it happened for everyday folks. Now, who got that income on the business end, it is another question. But I think it's a testament to the fact that we can create a different set of circumstances and opportunities that seemed impossible before the pandemic. And in the way that it's impacted the communities that I'm a part of, so that means me at WEPOWER and being the founder and leader here, but also being in the community to whom I'm accountable and do this work with. Unfortunately, it's been a lot of death. We work with everyday, amazing Black folks who are struggling with poverty, who are struggling with health inequities, who have folks in their family struggling with these things. So unfortunately, I've received texts and I've been on calls and I've been on virtual sessions where the conversations are full of folks wrestling with and trying to grieve and process the loss of immediate family members, but in a way that's super traumatic because we can't even go to funerals right now. And so it's been quite overwhelming to figure out what does healing look like, what does grieving look like amidst a pandemic within a pandemic that is killing Black folks at an alarming rate. And in particular, one of our target zip codes has one of the highest COVID-19 rates, which just exacerbates all of these other inequities that were true and remain true before this pandemic hit. So it's a lot of death, unfortunately. And I think the relationship between the uprisings and all of the police, the killing of Black folks with police, to me reveals that Black folks are being killed by systemic racism, both silently and very loudly and clearly. And our ability to name both of those ways that Black folks are being killed will be really important, because we really have to think about how do we shift all of these systems, because they're all so interconnected.
Charli, I love that you started with the point of so many things happening now that were once thought to be or we were told would be impossible. Another example that comes to mind for me is the release of many incarcerated individuals who suddenly, now that there was a pandemic, it wasn't necessary for them to be incarcerated, right? And it's like, well, really, was it ever necessary for them to be incarcerated? And clearly it wasn't essential that they be. And so that's one area. Another area that I'm very hopeful that some of these conversations will continue as to what's really necessary and what a transformed system could look like. Detroit and the Detroit region was hit extremely hard by COVID, and it felt like there were a couple weeks where it was like daily. It was those texts and those calls that somebody had it, someone had passed away, someone had a stroke as a complication of it and was back in the hospital. And it felt like it was never ending. Luckily, that has subsided a little bit. It's obviously still happening, but not at the level it was, at least here, for those few weeks. I would say the communities that we serve and that I think about the most, which is children and youth, there are a lot of things keeping me up at night in that space. So we talk a lot in K-12 conversations lately about learning loss and other academic impacts of missing school and being out for such long periods of time. But I'm really, really concerned about the trauma and mental health component and impacts on children specifically, who may not fully understand why they're not able to see their friends anymore, why they're not able to be at school. And again, back to the initial question, Chanel, about community, I think community is where school is where kids have that community, right? Not the only place in many cases, but now that they don't have that at such important times in their lives, I'm really, really concerned about what the impacts of that is going to be, and really, really trying to be thoughtful about what are potential solutions, what can happen or what can be done to make sure that the negative impacts of that are mitigated.
So I agree with Kayla and Charli. This is certainly a different way of operating and navigating the world. It's been heartbreaking and bitter at times, as it has been heartening and motivational. As Kayla suggested, in Detroit, we lost a great deal of amazingly talented people in a very short span of time. My colleague died, who served as the fellow co-creator of the Detroit 67 project at the Historical Society. His name was Marlo Stoudemire. Some of you maybe have heard about him and familiar with him. He died in March, and it really changed the way that I looked at the world around me, and the ways in which our colleagues and friends who all knew him, really the way we processed, that type of loss. This was something that felt like it could have been preventable with more knowledge and information. And at the blink of the eye, we lost people, and we really couldn't say goodbye, as Charli suggested. And that within itself is really devastating. But I know within my own circles and within the Detroit community, I think we looked toward one another. We checked in with each other regularly. We expressed our care and appreciation for one another. And I'm still finding ways to express my anguish and grief in ways that are healthy, because it's really a trauma that we experienced. And this week has been especially hard for me in the midst of this awakening in which we're addressing this really difficult issue related to institutional racism in our country at the same time, and all of the implications around that. It's just interrelated. COVID-19 disproportionately impacted communities of color and our health and well-being. And, a lot of those disparities are rooted in, structural racism, and that's just a very real thing. In my current work, COVID has made it really clear that the Kapor Center has a vital role in unpacking the underlying issues related to disparities in education and access. We will develop a strategic framework to guide our peers in computer science and related fields. We'll also work with experts and young people who will play a lead role in defining our work. And we'll eventually fund efforts to address and create new culturally relevant tools through our RFP process that will start next year. So it's about actively being a part of the solution, asking the difficult questions, working together, leading with an openness, compassion, and looking for the opportunities for us to really support one another in meaningful ways.
Thank you. I want to lift up, Charli, you shared, what does it look like to heal? And I'm seeing a couple of questions come through, and this is also something that Frank McGee asked as well. And so we're going to come back to that because I think it's a powerful question and notion. And Kalisha, you also shared that COVID has, shifted the very way that we perceive the world. And so I think that's a great segue. I'm curious, with all that is happening, Burnell, I'd like to specifically, ask you, like, how has your lens changed or shifted when we think about engaging with and in community? And I'm curious, like, personally, how you're thinking through that, but also what that conversation might sound like at the Obama Foundation with your colleagues.
Absolutely. So for me, when I think about everything that is occurring right now, and I think about how my lens toward community engagement has shifted, is really, to me, hasn't really shifted. It's been more about doubling down on principles that and values that were already a big part of how I live my life. So things like listen more than you speak, and those that are closest to the pain and or problem are typically closest to the solution. And then another one, just a part of a quote that I try to live by is, don't seek to be great, seek to serve, right? So all of these things are critical pieces of how you can sharpen your engagement during these times, because when you aren't able to be in direct proximity with someone, standing face to face, or as much as you would otherwise, your listening skills and your ability to really get in tune with what is going on with the folks you are trying to work with or support or serve, however you want to phrase it, is that much more important. So for me, it's been a lot of reflecting on how I can push myself to be better on things that I value in terms of core principles when doing community engagement. So that's I would say that's number one. And then I think in terms of your question about how that conversation occurs inside the Obama Foundation, it's very similar to every organization right now. I think everyone is taking a look inside in reviewing their own policies and practices and staff retention and recruitment activities, because everyone can get better, right? There is no perfect organization. Organizations that are led by most progressive folks, even our most heralded activists, they all have ways they can get better. And I think that, continuous improvement is the hallmark of a strong organizational culture. So for us, there's been a lot of checking in on each other, checking in on the mental health and wellness of our team collectively, and particularly our Black staff. And I think that, the Black staff in particular have certainly banded together to make sure that we are pushing ourselves to be as present, effective, and responsive as we can in this moment, because there are a lot of organizations that typically communities lean on during these times. But unfortunately, because of COVID and how COVID has ravaged both the economy and just our way of life in general, a lot of those organizations that everyone looks to when things get a little rough are overrun. They are, stretched to capacity. So we really tried to play, sometimes publicly, but a lot of times behind the scenes, really a backstop to the organizations within our network that, have strong leaders in place and are already shouldering so much burden of response, both, in the rapid response needed to deal with a medical and global pandemic, but at the same time of the pandemic that's plagued us since, the inception of our nation. So all these things, like Chanel said, none of these things are new. The health disparities that exist because of structural racism have just become more heightened and even more devastating during this pandemic. So we've really been pushing ourselves to think about what we can do to be better, how we can do more, how we can check our own issues. And, you can never allow yourself to think that your work is done as an organization. And once you do, you're part of the problem. And I think we've also had to rethink our, our typical muscles that we use in doing engagement. If you have tuned into some of our town halls that have taken place, there was a whole national town hall, regional town hall series that we did in response to COVID-19, 4 national, 4 regional, and within all of those conversations, we were looking for solutions both from national leaders, but also lifting up experiences from folks on the ground in communities at the more grassroots level, because you need both of those things to actually make the progress that we're going to make. So pushing ourselves to elevate voices that maybe at other times we haven't been as intentional about, and looking forward to continue doing that, because this thing isn't over and it's not going to be over anytime soon.
Burnell, I appreciate you, saying we all can do better. And that's certainly something that we've also been thinking about internally at SCP. And so, we had our regular kind of team Monday check-in, and just said we can't go about business as usual. And so, had a conversation just checking in with everyone, Black staff and staff who don't identify as Black. And I ended up going out to my back patio after that conversation and just started writing. And we pretty much, shared publicly, here's what we were doing. This is what we have got to do better. And this is what we haven't even scratched the surface with, but we must act with urgency. And so I appreciate you naming, we all have to do better. And it's not necessarily that we have to do more, right, in terms of work and outputs, but it's how do we get better, right? How do we lift up the voices we haven't, like you were saying? And so that is a perfect seg, again, kind of into this next question. I want to kind of piggyback off of what a few of you are saying. I'm curious not only how your organizations are directly supporting community, but what does the conversation look like, Charli, Kalisha, Kayla, inside your organizations as you all are thinking about lessons we're learning through COVID? So that could be that internal work and also the external, community support work. But I'm curious, what does that look like for you all?
Yeah, so I am a huge fan of Adrienne Marie Brown, who I know is a Detroit native, and I'm almost done with her book, Emergent Strategy, but I'm kind of intentionally not finishing it because I want to savor every word, almost like a good movie. But anyway, I think one of the key takeaways, or not good movie, but Mill, or either one. But anyway, one of the key takeaways from the book and her theory is around it's hard for us to pursue a different world and a radically transformed future if we're not willing to do that work internally within the organizations that are supposed to be leading this external transformation. And so that really resonates with me, and in particular resonates with me in this moment. And so some of the things that we've been doing is leaning into self-care, honestly, a concept that I always struggle with and continue to struggle with, but realize its importance more than ever. And so we're having half days on Fridays. We're calling those sabbaticals. We now offer weekly meditation sessions. Folks have a stipend to be able to access counseling and personal healing sessions, but also bringing in folks to sometimes replace our team meetings and making those like dedicated spaces for healing, facilitated by a practitioner who really gets that work. And part of the work that I think it's allowed us to do is to allow space for grace, and also by coincidence or maybe not, we're in the midst of refining our theory of change, or as we call it, theory of action. And I don't think it's a coincidence that now our revised version of our theory of change now leans heavily on the role that healing plays, to deal with the trauma of structural racism, but also deal with the trauma of just unexpected things that come up with life. So I think that's one thing that we'll start to see more of in terms of how we do the work internally and externally. And then in terms of the way that we're supporting our community members, it's showing up in a lot of ways. So I think I did a pretty drastic pivot from like no direct programs. It's all about policy and system change. And that has been the way that WEPOWER has shown up. And in this moment, because of the pandemic, it's like, no, actually it's a both and. I have to disrupt this either or thinking that's actually pretty white supremacist. And so we've started to phone bank all of our community members, phone bank as many residents in our target neighborhoods to just check in on them. How are you? How are you navigating this pandemic? Do you have groceries? Do you have your medication? Are you able to cover some of your utilities? And there's a lot of folks who aren't doing okay, and who, whether that not doing okay means they need financial support or just someone to give them a call. So we've actually sort of reallocated some of our funds to provide for some mutual aid. And we've seen a really beautiful emergence of a mutual aid network in St. Louis that's intentionally standing up infrastructure for that to be much more sustainable. So that's one way that we're providing, we're leaning in with our current community members, formal members of WEPOWER, but informal folks too. And then in the early child education space, a space that is majority Black women who are paid minimum wage, but who are doing some of the most important work that exists and that will support all of our collective success. And so we've been engaged in a year-long process to reimagine and redesign early childhood education, which also included a learning trip to Detroit to see you all's amazing work. And now we have shifted from reimagining to actually organizing to get the system redesigned. And so we've been working on a ballot initiative in St. Louis City and County. But this moment has revealed to us that we can even talk about a ballot initiative in November if these centers don't have the resources to open like right now and today. And so we're not encouraging the economy to reopen, but we know that other forces are, and that puts pressure on centers to reopen. And so we just engaged with our partners in a pretty rapid 2-week campaign where we supported hundreds of particularly Black women ECE providers to demand resources from the federal CARES Act funding or CARES grant funding. So we just secured $7.5 million in the city and county through a pretty quick and grassroots campaign to provide emergency relief for ECE providers. So we're thinking about the mutual aid and the direct service and the resources to individuals, but we're also thinking about what are the urgent policy changes and resource allocations we can consider at the population level to really address the pandemic.
Charli, I want to ask a follow-up question there. And actually, I'm seeing questions coming through, so I'm cognizant and don't want to monopolize all of the time. So particularly with WePower, obviously you all are deeply embedded in the St. Louis region. And I'm curious, as you have been doing these, like the rapid campaign that was extremely successful, the work that you all are doing and have been doing for several years, so you talked about, you know, I'm going to be systems level. This is the work that we're going to do. Now we're looking at how do we provide direct support, this both and approach. What else have you learned, realized? What are you doing that is an opportunity you wouldn't have had otherwise? So I don't want to, you know, it's almost like this silver line, like what light bulb went off because of COVID that you and the WePower team will continue to do beyond this time?
Yeah, so I would say, as the theme that you all ground us in is community, it's really thinking about how do we build community in less formal ways. So we facilitate multi-month, sometimes multi-year initiatives where we build community members' capacity to organize, design policy solutions, and then lead campaigns. And now we're being more fluid and saying, like, maybe we should just hold space this week in this moment. It doesn't have to be tied to some big lofty policy campaign. Maybe it can just be a space for community to come process the world as it is and be in relationship with one another. So at first, those like weekly meditation sessions were just for our team. Now anyone part of the WePower community can join those. So we have mothers in East St. Louis on those calls with our team members, and we have it's such a beautiful diversity of folks who are sitting there processing very philosophical quotes and spiritual things, and trying to hold space in a world that's just incredibly crazy at this moment. And then the other way I would say is we're in the process of building out what does our next iteration of supporting businesses look like, and how does that really operate in relationship to sparking living wage jobs, because we're thinking about how do we shift the political circumstances in communities and also the economic circumstances. So as we talk about how many folks lost their jobs, how do we reimagine an economy that provides sustainable career pathways for our Black and Latinx community members who were either forced to continue to work as essential workers, or who lost their jobs, and either way were devalued in ways that tend to be historic. And so for us, it's also thinking about what are those resilient workforce paths and industries that we can start to think about, that we can recruit businesses to scale in, but also can create the jobs of tomorrow for our communities. And then back to the healing space, so leaning into that in a much more intentional way, and knowing that this work is internal and personal, this work is relational, and this work is systemic. And so how do all of those work together to really drive towards transformation?
Thanks, Charli. We're seeing a lot of comments, and I'm seeing heads nodding amongst the panelists, and just am so grateful for the work that you're doing and your team is doing and leading in St. Louis and in the region. Kayla and Kalisha, we've also had a couple of questions come through around funding and resources and opportunities, both local and national. And so I'm curious, as you know, we have all been experiencing COVID, how have you shifted, you know, funding priorities and more national priorities? And how are you all thinking about that, even like beyond COVID, if you will?
Well, there are a number of things that I've really appreciated about the Kapor Center's response and efforts to address this very real problem. The first is being really supportive of staff in a similar fashion to Charli, like, you know, ensuring our well-being, our health. We are all working virtually, and we probably will for some time. But I think that they're thinking carefully about the quality of our lives and how they're being impacted at this time. So, you know, ensuring we have access to counseling services, weekly meditation, funds to support our health and wellness, and having ongoing conversations as teams and as an organization to drive solutions are all things that are really important. Next, Kapor is playing a key role in the creation and the development of tools that can help communities in real time. So many of the people that we serve live in spaces that were economically vulnerable on a good day. And so now when you add COVID, it just really exacerbates the problem. So Kapor has allocated resources to address problems locally through more than $200,000 in donations to the Alameda County Food Bank and the Oakland Public Education Fund. They're also doing work to support small businesses. And in April, they launched an effort known as Onward California, and most recently Onward US. These are online resources to help people that are directly impacted by COVID. And it represents a collaboration among 20 states across the country. It offers access to emergency resources. It helps get people connected to training programs that can skill them for new careers. They're doing job seekers matchmaking with employers that are looking for people with current skill sets and different skill sets. In the first 2 weeks of its launch, Onward California matched at least 300,000 Californians with at least one resource. And so that work will continue. In addition to that, an initial $350,000 was repurposed and allocated from the foundation to address the crisis. So, and since the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, the organization is actively examining new and existing efforts to dismantle racial injustice across the country, because that's, really the goal is to address these issues. The organization has been doing this work through tech over the past 7 years, but it's, the heart of it is to really dismantle institutional racism and to be at the forefront of those kinds of conversations.
Yes, I would say I too have felt very fortunate to be in the role that I'm in now during this time, because of how quickly Mr. and Mrs. Ballmer kind of helped us to pivot, be able to pivot quickly to deploy resources faster than we'd usually be able to. So in each of our 3 regions, as well as nationally, listen to a lot of different community members as to what their needs were. So we invested with very quick turnarounds funds in each of our local county governments in the communities that we serve, to organizations working directly with community members on the ground, to several different school districts and others who were doing both immediate rapid response work, but also thinking about some longer term needs. So the workforce development agencies is one example of that. Internally, we're very, very quick to come up with ways and push some of our team members to come up with ways for us to stay connected. So back to the importance of community, but to stay connected with each other during this time. And so in addition to regular team meetings, having optional internal Zoom coffee hours and team lunches and things like that, just so that people could have an opportunity to just share in a more casual setting, which I think I'm realizing in various different situations that I'm involved in, whether it be work, community organizations I'm on the board of, that like those casual conversations are being missed right now, because you don't have the few minutes before the meeting starts or the quick break, because everything is Zoom back to back to back. And so that's been helpful. In addition to funding grants quickly when COVID hit, we also, so Ballmer Group believes really strongly in partnering with government. And so once the small business loan program started, so the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program started, we really wanted to make sure that nonprofit organizations were able to have access to those funds. Legally, they were allowed to, but many didn't have existing relationships with lenders or had other capacity issues or other barriers to actually accessing those funds. So we invested in Community Reinvestment Fund, a national community development financial institution who is also an SBA approved lender, and worked to ensure that grantees of ours, other partners, other community organizations we engage with had access to those loans. Additionally, we've partnered with organizations in each of our regions to make sure that any of those nonprofits who did receive those funds also have technical assistance to ensure that they're able to get those transformed into grants. So the idea was, which many of you probably already know, that it's a loan unless you use it for payroll, and then it can be transitioned into a grant. But we knew that just because of organizational capacity and needs, that TA might be essential. And so that was something we were very, very excited to be able to do. As we think moving forward, so again, partnering with government is a major value of ours as an organization. Steve always says that government is the biggest philanthropy. Like, no matter how much you have in philanthropic resources, it pales in comparison to the public dollars. And so figuring out how we can best leverage the federal dollars that are coming through or fill gaps. And so that's something we've been paying close attention to, as well as the impact on our state budgets. So I've been doing a ton of analysis around what the school aid fund in Michigan is going to look like in the fall, what holes our state budget is going to have, and where there may be some major needs to fill gaps or potential advocacy needs to be able to ensure that additional dollars do come through to the areas that we know are so important to our communities. We also internally have formed a couple different work groups on areas that are most critical to our mission. So early childhood, K-12, and workforce development. And those work groups are doing a lot of that. So analyzing the current public funding landscape, other contexts currently happening in each of those spaces, and figuring out what opportunities might be most important for us to plug into, either to accelerate, to catalyze new work or new dollars, or just kind of straight programmatic investments where it makes sense. So we also have really been focused on a lot of these areas. So it's causing a lot of doubling down on the things we already knew were important. We have done some major work nationally around Black male educator initiatives. So understanding the importance of Black male educator recruitment and development in particular. And so have been doing a lot of that and are thinking about how we can do more of that. Similarly in the criminal justice space. So those, I would say, are two focus areas that we're kind of lumped together as a boys and men of color focus within our portfolio, but we're figuring out where that can be expanded upon and where we really need to be investing more heavily. Also been excited that our founders, so Steve and Connie, have traditionally not been ones that want to do a lot of press related to their giving, but we've been in a lot of conversations recently about the importance of different voices speaking about these different issues and the importance of investing in these different areas. So I'm excited to see where those conversations go and whether they choose to use their voices a little bit more intensely when it's appropriate.
Thanks, Kayla. And I'm looking, we're having some questions coming through. There's a question that was raised, and Charli, something you shared earlier. And so I want to pose this question and actually go into Q&A next. And so for a few minutes. So for those tuning in, if you'd like to chat your questions into our Q&A space, we'll be taking a couple questions as well. But this question was posed by a participant. What does healing look like for us going beyond COVID?
Well, I think that's a loaded question, but a very important one. So I think there are so many sort of layers and levels and components of healing, and there's also many ways to define it. So I think about the opportunity for folks to be in relationship with one another, and as they acknowledge the violent truth of our history and processing that and how it's impacted us both physically and emotionally to date. There's a book I'm reading right now. Oh, here it is. My Grandmother's Hands. and it talks about how to heal from racialized trauma. And it talks about like how trauma as a result of systemic racism is literally impacting our physical bodies. And so I think part of this work is acknowledging the impact of systemic racism, being in a space to process it together, and also using that space to figure out like what is possible beyond this moment. So a lot of that is breathing techniques, a lot of that is mindfulness, but a lot of that is simply being in dialogue and conversation with one another in ways that that we haven't done before, but also pairing that with what does it look like for government and for systems and institutions to acknowledge the role that they've played in perpetuating the violence inflicted upon communities of color, and in this moment as we see it happen in particular to Black folks of all kind, including Black trans folks who continue to get overlooked. So there's, I think, a role for all of us to play, and then there's the role of systems. So shifting systems and exploring the ways that systems can foster a culture of healing versus a culture of harm are my immediate reflections. But I know that's a lot of high level stuff. But that book is really interesting. I haven't finished it yet, though.
I'll just quickly piggyback on some of the points that Charli made. I think specifically when you're talking about healing, you have to stand in the truth, right? You have to acknowledge what is occurring. Where is pain, trauma, negative impacts? Where are these things coming from? And I think that one of the outgrowths, we started, this conversation is couched in sort of through the lens of COVID, and one of the outgrowths of dealing with this pandemic is that it created an environment in which Americans could no longer look away from the racial violence that has been occurring since the country's founding, right? But it's the only difference between any other year leading up to now and now is that there are no sporting events you can go to. You can't go to a restaurant to get away from it. You can't get on a plane. You cannot look away. So everyone's had to have been forced to face the truth about what's happening right now, which is actually a very critical step in healing. Right now, it hurts. You kind of have to hurt a little bit before you start to heal properly. And I think that's, in particular, the stage that we're in as a nation right now. And it is incredibly painful, but these are conversations and actions and movements that needed to take place. So I just wanted to appreciate what Charli said there.
I think to me it comes back to community. So connecting with others, I think is or can be healing. And so figuring out, especially when it's hard to be out doing the things we often tend to do with each other, whether it's going out to a restaurant or going to some other public place that may not be possible now, figuring out what those ways to connect are. I know throughout this process throughout the past few months, what's been really apparent is the need for just quick touch bases with people that I care about. So whether it's a family member or friend, just kind of say, hey, hope you're well, or hey, how are you doing, to membership organizations that I'm involved in, that it was like intentional outreach, just quick calls to every member. Like we the board split up the full membership list and said, hey, check in. Hey, just calling to see how you're doing. Is there anything you need? Anything we can be supportive with? And I think even though nearly everybody said, no, it's okay, I'm just so happy to hear from you. Like, it's just so happy to know someone was thinking about me, to hear someone's voice. Some people needed to talk longer. They clearly hadn't been able to have a casual conversation in a while. And so I think that those opportunities for fellowship and being very intentional about having those in spaces that may be different than we usually do is going to be really, really, really important for healing. In addition to the larger structural, I think, system changes and transformations that we need to see, additional investments in systems and in efforts that can enable that healing as well. But I think when it comes right down to it, community is going to be a major method of healing for many of us.
I would agree with everything that my fellow panelists have just shared with you. I think healing, it's an active everyday practice, on an individual level and on a community level. And it's not something that's easy to accomplish even, day to day. So I think, what's most important is to be kind to yourself, to be kind to others. I find myself taking a moment to reach out, like Kayla suggested, to my friends and family, folks that I haven't talked to in some time, to just make sure that they're, as okay as they can be. And if they're not okay, we, can completely understand why. Being honest about what's happening around us, turning off the news, and being in a more quiet space if you have to do that for yourself. On a regular basis. I think that's really important as well. Doing the best that you can to be of support to, humanity and, through compassion and love, but also loving yourself, not taking on too much, being honest about, what you can and cannot do. I think all of that plays a role in just allowing us to stay sane and healthy as we navigate a space that we have not experienced before, not in our lifetime. So, just to love each other, to love ourselves, to focus on the things that bring us joy, to expressing our gratitude. I think all of those are like a part, in addition to what Charli suggested, which I think is really important, holding our leadership, city, state, federal accountable, and demanding that more be done to address, some of the more critical issues. Like, I think all of that plays a key role in our overall healing.
I can appreciate how lofty that question is, but I think that each of you have certainly offered up these nuggets of just those small acts every day. And those more systemic, right, to your point, Charli and Kalisha, actions that we must take. Several folks have chatted in or posed as a question, while each of you are, reporting from respective communities across the country, is there opportunity for Detroit-based organizations, for instance, to partner with someone that might be based in DC, or that might be headquartered out of California? So I'd love for each of you, in wrapping up, to just share how folks can stay in contact with you, get connected, and what that could look like to partner and collaborate across communities. I have a feeling you will have plenty of folks following up with you after this conversation. So if you also want to chat in, if you have like any handles or anything that folks can stay connected with, and then just kind of share out how can people collaborate with you across, Detroit, St. Louis, DC, and nationally.
Okay. So I'm happy to share. So the work that I'm doing is nationally based, and we would love for people that are interested in having conversations about creating more culturally responsive practices in education and computer science to be a part of this network. So you can go to kaporcenter.org /equitablecs/ and there you can scroll down to the web through the web page to the Join Us section. And that's where you'll be asked to fill out just a little bit of information, your name and email address. And that's where we can connect you to our network, because we intend to host a series of webinars. We're currently developing and putting the finishing touches on a newsletter. We're also forming our advisory, a national advisory of adults, as well as a student leadership team of young people representing different communities across the country. So we definitely want you to stay involved with us. Onwardus.org is also a great place to tap into a variety of different resources, and as I relayed to earlier. And then you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm also on Twitter at KD in the D. And I'll put that in the notes, but I can't talk and chew gum at the same time, so.
I'm also sharing my LinkedIn link. Would love to connect with anyone. So Kayla Roney Smith. Also on Twitter at Kayla Roney Smith. While I have not tweeted as much recently, I have twin daughters who are 2 that I feel like are anytime I'm not on Zoom, I'm chasing them around. But I am still active on it. I read it all. I just haven't been initiating tweets. But Twitter or LinkedIn, and then can potentially set up phone call or whatever else might make sense from there.
Thanks, Kayla. And Charli, several folks have been specifically chatting in, obviously given the work of WEPOWER based in St. Louis, looks like some of our Detroit folks are interested how they might be able to collaborate and connect.
Well, one, I love and admire Detroit. I think there's so much that St. Louis and Detroit has in common in both good ways and bad ways. Not that it's our faults here on this call. But I dropped all of our information in the chat. So I shared our website, our Facebook, and our Instagram pages. And in terms of ways to get engaged, anytime I can partner with Detroit folks, I would love to. There's so much I've learned from you all over the past few years. I made 2 learning trips to Detroit last year, actually. One thanks to Chanel. And in terms of ways you all can support the work here in St. Louis, we have several community-led campaigns right now. So if you go to our website, you can sign a letter in support of the What's Next SLPS campaign, demanding that the district not close all of the schools in North St. Louis, which is the majority Black part of town. You can sign our demands letter, demanding that the St. Louis Public School District advance budgeting transparency so community can understand where their taxpayer dollars are going. And you can also feel free to support our early childhood education work. We're trying to fundraise for that right now, actually, so that we can get more funds, more awareness about the opportunity to fund EC in our region. And then lastly, we're a few days away from Juneteenth. And so we are promoting a 72-hour campaign that we're calling Black Joy Juneteenth, where we're encouraging folks to buy Black, buy Black meaning Black-owned businesses, buy from there over 72 hours, give Black meaning give to Black-led organizations in St. Louis, working to fight for Black folks' freedom, and then defending Black. So we know there's a lot of amazing work happening around criminal justice reform that WEPOWER isn't leading, but we're encouraging folks to join the efforts of others to defend Black lives over the next 72 hours and beyond. So if you go to our website or our Instagram, you'll see more information about all of those things.
And I went ahead and was a good student and dropped all the info in the chat for how you can get in touch with me. I left my email as well as some links related to today's conversation on some of the things that the Obama Foundation and My Brother's Keeper Alliance have been up to in response to COVID and how you can engage with MBK Alliance. Specifically, I also just want to give a quick plug to the mayor's pledge that was announced on our town hall with President Obama as it relates to police violence that's been occurring in the country. So that pledge in particular is a call for mayors, city councils, and police oversight bodies to address use of force policies. And one, just review the policies, 2, engage communities authentically in a range of input, experiences, and stories, and then report their findings back within 90 days with a commitment to reform the community's use of force policies within their police department. So I'll drop that link there as well, so you can encourage your local leaders to jump in.
Thank you all. And before I pass it back over to Alyssa, again, I just want to thank each of you for the work that you are leading and how you all are serving and engaging. And just based on some of the comments we're seeing, I do believe that there has been insight shared in this conversation that will help ensure that we are more prepared and stronger coming out of COVID, knowing that there are several systemic inequities that we are still up against and fighting the good fight towards. So I just appreciate you all and everything you're doing. And thank you again for joining us. With that, I will pass it back over to you, Alyssa.
Thanks, Chanel, and thank you, panelists, for the wonderful conversation you all led today. And I'm just grateful to hear about the powerful work you all are doing in community. So before we transition to our community, ways that you all as participants and panelists can contribute to our community, I just want to share ways that you all can stay engaged with us as strategic community partners. So first, you can subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on social media, keep an eye out for a follow-up email that'll have a recording with captions, as well as all the links shared and additional resources that you all can use. And then last, be sure to register for the Culture for Change conference, which again will be July 13th to the 16th. And early bird registration ends on June 22nd. And again, just reminding you that the Culture for Change conference will help hone your skills on personal leadership development, managing and leading, organizational culture, as well as opportunities for networking and an accountability group. So we're going to transition into our closing session, which we want to dig right into how we can be engaged in our community now and into the future. So a community engagement organization showcase. So first up, we have United Way, sharing ways that we can engage through them.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, guys. My name is Kristen Sabalskis. I am a manager of volunteer engagement at United Way here in Southeastern Michigan. So if you are unfamiliar with United Way, we do have several locations across the country. Most likely you probably have one in your community, but we do operate independently based on each of our community's needs. So we are not typically a direct service provider. Instead, United Way acts primarily as a convener between community organizations, funders, and governmental entities to drive change in our communities. Here in Southeastern Michigan, we are based out of Detroit. We are currently in New Center for those of you that are in the area. But we specifically serve the counties of Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne, and that does include the city of Detroit as well. So our work here primarily, we know in Southern Michigan that almost half of our families are struggling to meet their basic needs. So it really is up to organizations like ours to work with community partners, our donors, our advocates, and our volunteers to mobilize our community. And we do that around two pillars. So those are stable households and thriving children. And when we talk about stable households, we're talking about making sure that families can meet their basic needs and that they have access to financial skills and the resources and the support that they need to be successful. And on the flip side of that, when we talk about thriving children, we mean that kids are prepared when they go into kindergarten, they are ready to learn, and they are supported throughout their academic career so that they can succeed in school and life beyond graduation. I know a lot of this is, a lot has changed for us just in terms of the way in which we have engaged volunteers in response to the COVID pandemic. And our organization has really had to pivot a lot of our strategies. So overall, one of the main things that we've been working on is we have been organizing various funds that are allowing our community organizations to either maintain or expand on their services in order to meet the need of the community, which we know has been increasing exponentially due to the loss of jobs, healthcare, being in the hospital, all of those awful things that have been happening. And so we have a couple different funds that have specifically been working with community organizations, but also a few that have been providing PPE equipment for organizations and frontline responders. So In terms of volunteer space, I mentioned that I am one of the managers of volunteer engagement. So I personally have been with United Way for 12 years. We have kind of two sides of our department. One focuses primarily on engaging our companies, our corporate entities in volunteer service in the community. And then the other side is more on the community engagement end, and that is where I work. So I manage our online volunteer portal, which connects individuals in the community with other nonprofits based on your passion and where you're located. And I manage a lot of our relationships with our volunteer coordinators at our community nonprofits. So I provide training on volunteer management and essentially just make sure that these nonprofit partners have the expertise that they need to properly manage volunteers so that it is expanding their capacity rather than becoming a capacity burden. And so I mentioned our volunteer portal. That is like the easiest way that you can find something that is really engaging to you in terms of making change in our community. So we launched our portal back in 2017. We're currently at almost 9,000 users, and we have 186 nonprofit organizations that have profiles and are posting volunteer opportunities throughout the Southeastern Michigan region. So under normal circumstances, you would be able to find opportunities across all interest areas, whether that be tutoring, food packing, meal serving, to volunteering with the Michigan Humane Society or an environmental organization. But obviously we have had to kind of pivot our strategy because of the pandemic. So currently all of the United Way led in-person volunteer projects are suspended until September 1st. And obviously, as we've seen with many dates that have been thrown out there by many organizations, it's until at least September 1st. So I would anticipate that there may be some changes to that as well. But what we've really done is we have had to move from being in person to having everything virtually. And so that has both allowed us to be creative in spaces where we haven't been able to do that before, but it's also forced us to be creative. And so right now, if you go to our volunteer portal, we have a COVID-19 volunteer response landing page. And so on that page, you are going to find in-person opportunities, whether that's packing food boxes, meal delivery to homebound seniors, and some other in-person type opportunities with our partners. There's also virtual and remote opportunities. So you could build some care kits at home that can be distributed to the community. You can also, deliver meals, call seniors to check in with them. There's a lot of different ways that you can get involved based on, your comfortability of being out in the community. You can do it from home or you can go out and be on the front lines. It's really up to you. And so on that page, we currently have almost 50 volunteer opportunities that are available with over 26 agencies throughout all 3 counties that are posting their needs. And just since we've launched this in mid-March, we've had over 1,600 volunteers go out into the community and make a difference. And so we definitely encourage you to do that as well. And so what I will do, I know I'm going over a little bit over time, I apologize, I talk too much, but we also serve nonprofits. So I will go ahead and drop a couple messages and some links in the chat box. And so feel free to reach out to me, I'll share my information as well, but we would love to have you, whether you're a volunteer or a nonprofit. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're gonna go to Charli with WEPOWER again.
Hey everyone. So I will amplify our Black Joy Juneteenth efforts actually, since that's around the corner. So I will drop some details right now. But if you could make the pledge at that bit.ly link to Buy Black, Give Black, Defend Black, and support the work here in St. Louis. We would really appreciate it. And once you make the pledge, we'll follow up with a link to a resource hub on ways that you can support work here in St. Louis. And then we'll also share some national actions that you can participate in this weekend as well. So really trying to use this moment, particularly Juneteenth, to be a moment of celebration and joy for the resilience and strength of Black folks throughout our history, and also acknowledge that that freedom isn't free, and this is still a constant struggle, and that we can co-create a future where Black folks live free by putting our resources together to support Black liberation. So hope you can make the pledge, and I look forward to finding ways to connect once we come out of this pandemic.
Thank you. So we have Dylan Brown here from Eastside Community Network.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dylan Brown. I am currently the Communications and Engagement Manager at Eastside Community Network, where we develop people, places, and plans for sustainable growth on Detroit's East Side. So obviously the pandemic has done something different to everyone represented on this call and organizations represented. But due to the love for the people, we've had to respond accordingly and still get things done. So it's great to hear different organizations doing great things to ensure that the community is feel loved. They feel the love and they feel support. Recently, ECN, we delivered food boxes within the neighborhoods, partnered with Salvation Army, and we delivered about 50 food boxes to 50 different families within the neighborhood. So, we've been trying to do a little bit of everything. As far as engagement, what we do is literally call individuals. On the East Side, we have meetings usually all the time, and residents show up, but now we're moving into a more virtual space where some residents, they stuck around, but there are others who are not able to join on a Zoom link, or they don't know how to, click the link and join in, and, the whole 9 yards you have to do to get on a Zoom call or even go on Facebook Live. So we literally call individuals and just check in. We serve over, a couple thousand of residents on the east side of Detroit. And we try to make sure that everyone is involved and everyone has information. We send out LEAP alerts every week, which is basically a newsletter with different resources all across the city. And we bottle them up into a newsletter via email, send them out. And we're getting back to our mailing. We're going to be mailing out as well. We've also did the property tax exemption. We're still a part of that, making calls, ensuring that residents who did the property tax exemption workshop in the past, we're giving them calls and ensuring that they are up to date and, informed about the PAYS program that has been newly integrated within the city of Detroit. June 6th, we did our Show Me the Money Day, which was just a webinar in which we're just trying to prepare residents for, financial relief post-COVID. We did things, while COVID was going on and trying to, inform residents on ways they can stay financially afloat during this time, and pointing them into, resources and different things that could benefit them and their families. So we try to do a little bit of everything. And also there is obviously the economic, impacts that's been, within our neighborhoods. There's also an emotional and social impact, right? So what we've done is integrated a yoga. We do community yoga. We've been doing it for the past few Mondays, and we're going to extend all the way through July. And that's actually funded through ECN currently. And we also did a virtual man cave where we brought over 20 Black men onto a call and just talked socially. We talked about Michael Jordan's The Last Dance. We discussed the impacts of, the census and the importance of being counted. And we kind of did a metaphorical synergy when we said, Michael Jordan didn't win the championship until he counted on his teammates. We got to make sure that we're being counted as men within our community and make sure our families are being counted. So, we're trying to do a little bit of everything to ensure that we're painting the entire picture for our residents and our residents are not missing out. You can reach us, www.ecn-detroit.org. I'll drop my information. I'm also a Challenge Detroit Fellow with Alyssa, so I'll make sure that she gives all the information out as well. But it's good to hear all the great things that everyone is doing.
Thank you so much, Dylan. And our final two organizations, they weren't able to make it, but I'll just speak for them a little bit. So first, Brilliant Detroit. They work with youth and families in the Detroit area to help provide basic needs as well as bridge the gap between education. So examples of their programming right now is virtual tutoring. So that is for everyone. So if you have a youth who you want to bridge that gap and make sure the brain drain during the summer is reduced, you can reach out to them for virtual tutoring. Additionally, they are taking donations for anything that children can need. So diapers, gently used clothing, things like that. They regularly have programming at their various houses. So they are very much so in the neighborhoods. Each of their locations are actual houses located directly in the heart of a specific neighborhood. You'll get more information about them in our follow-up, as well as I will drop their links in the chat. And then last, some DMV organizations for those in the DC area. So a few folks to highlight: Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, Urban Teachers, Martha's Table, and Black Lives Matter DC. So you will get more information about those organizations again in the follow-up email. Those are a few folks, if you are in that area, or even if you're across the nation and you want to reach out to a different community from yours, you can tap into them. So again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for our final Culture for Change preview series. Again, thank you all to the panelists and the community organizations who came today to share about the powerful work you're doing and how people can engage. And remember to sign up for the Culture for Change conference, July 13th to July 16th. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.